The late afternoon sun slanted through the pine trees, dappling the winding rural road in shifting patterns of light and shadow. Sarah, 30-something and usually a whirlwind of anxious energy, felt a rare calm settle over her. Beside her, Mark, her husband, drove with his usual quiet competence, his hands relaxed on the wheel. The car, packed to the gills with overnight bags, a cooler full of Mark's famous potato salad, and a ridiculous inflatable flamingo for Aunt Carol's pool, hummed along, carrying them deeper into the Georgia countryside. Their annual family reunion at Aunt Carol's remote farmhouse was just an hour away, promising a weekend of familiar faces, questionable casseroles, and the kind of gentle chaos only a large eccentric family could provide. "Think Aunt Carol will still try to make us play charades?" Sarah chuckled, adjusting her sunglasses. "Last year, Uncle Bob almost dislocated his shoulder trying to mime rhinoceros." Mark smiled, a soft crinkle at the corners of his eyes. "Probably. And Uncle Bob will probably still be wearing that ridiculous Hawaiian shirt. It's tradition." The conversation drifted, a comfortable murmur of shared memories and gentle teasing. Sarah was navigating, her phone propped on the dash, though the GPS signal was starting to waver. They were deep in the kind of backroads where cell service became a luxury, not a given. It was peaceful, almost idyllic. Then a sudden, sharp intake of breath beside her. It was so abrupt, so out of character for Mark, that Sarah's easy calm evaporated instantly. She turned, her brow furrowing. "Mark? What is it?" He didn't answer immediately. His eyes, usually so warm and steady, were fixed on the rearview mirror, wide and unblinking. His knuckles, Sarah noticed, were white where they gripped the steering wheel. The car continued to glide forward, but the easy rhythm of their journey had shattered. "Turn the car around," he whispered, his voice a low, tight rasp Sarah barely recognized. It was devoid of his usual calm, laced instead with an urgent, almost desperate edge. Sarah's heart began to thud, a frantic drum against her ribs. "What? Why? What's wrong?" He didn't elaborate, didn't even glance at her. His gaze remained locked on the mirror, his jaw clenching. "Just turn the car around, Sarah. Now." His voice was firmer this time, an undeniable command. Instinct, born of years of trusting him implicitly, overrode her confusion and the blossoming fear. She trusted Mark more than she trusted her own instincts in a crisis. As she began to slow the car, preparing for a U-turn on the narrow road, she risked a quick glance at the rearview mirror herself. It was fleeting, a mere flicker in her periphery, but she saw it. A dark, sleek car, almost black against the deepening shadows of the tree line, parked at an odd, almost abandoned angle on the shoulder of the road they had just passed. It wasn't just parked, it looked hidden. And then a glint. A brief metallic flash from its rear window, catching the last rays of the sun. It was gone as quickly as it appeared, leaving her with an unsettling chill. The atmosphere in their car had shifted from light-hearted to taut with unspoken dread. Sarah executed a shaky U-turn, the tires crunching on the loose gravel. Every fiber of her being screamed to ask more questions, to demand an explanation, but the grim set of Mark's face, the unnerving silence, held her tongue. They were heading back, into whatever unknown terror had made her calm, steady husband freeze. As they drove back, the air inside their SUV became thick, suffocating with tension. Mark remained silent, his jaw still clenched, his eyes now darting between the road ahead and the rearview mirror, scanning the tree line, the ditches, every shadow. Sarah's imagination, usually a playful companion, now conjured dark scenarios, fueled by the unsettling quiet and the memory of that dark, sleek car. She wanted to ask, needed to know, but the words caught in her throat. His silence was more terrifying than any explanation he could have offered. They approached the spot where she'd seen the car. It was still there, a dark, ominous silhouette against the fading light. But now a figure was visible beside it. A woman, hunched over something on the ground, her posture oddly still. As they drew closer, Sarah's breath hitched. The woman was lying motionless, sprawled awkwardly on the damp earth beside the abandoned vehicle. The metallic glint Sarah had seen earlier was now clearly identifiable. A small silver water bottle, glinting innocently beside the woman's outstretched hand. Mark slammed on the brakes, the sudden jolt throwing them forward. Before Sarah could even process the stop, he was out of the car, moving with a speed and urgency she rarely saw in him. He rushed to the woman, his voice a low, urgent murmur as he knelt beside her. Sarah, though her legs felt like lead and her heart hammered against her ribs, knew she couldn't stay in the car. She followed him, her gaze fixed on the still figure. The woman was young, probably in her early 20s, dressed in practical hiking gear, sturdy boots, cargo pants, a fleece jacket. Her face was pale, almost ashen, and there was a dark, spreading stain on the side of her head. She was unconscious, bleeding, a faint, ragged breath barely stirring her chest. The sleek car's passenger door was ajar, revealing a jumble of camping supplies, a rolled-up sleeping bag, a small backpack, a half-eaten energy bar. It looked like she'd been preparing for an overnight trek, or perhaps had just returned from one. Mark, who had some basic first aid training from his hiking club, quickly assessed her. He pressed 2 fingers to her neck, his face grim. "She's alive," he announced, his voice tight with relief and concern. "But she's got a nasty head injury. She needs a hospital, Sarah. Now." The dilemma hit them with the force of a physical blow. They were in the middle of nowhere. No cell service. They were the only ones on this desolate stretch of road. Leaving her was unthinkable. Driving her to the nearest town, which was still an hour or more away, felt like a death sentence given her critical condition. The minutes stretched into an eternity, filled only with the sound of the wind rustling through the pines and the injured woman's shallow, ragged breaths. As Mark tried to stabilize her, gently applying pressure to the wound with a clean cloth from their first aid kit, Sarah felt a prickle of unease. It wasn't just the shock of the accident. It was something else, something primal. Her gaze drifted to the dense woods that bordered the road, a wall of dark green and deeper shadows. And then she saw it again, or thought she did. A glint, almost imperceptible, from deep within the trees. It was too quick to be sure, too fleeting to identify, but it felt like they were being watched. A shiver ran down her spine. "Mark," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I think someone's out there. In the woods." He didn't dismiss her. His head snapped up, his eyes scanning the tree line with a renewed intensity. His expression hardened, a protective instinct overriding his medical focus. He quickly reached into their car's trunk, pulling out the heavy tire iron, its cold metal glinting menacingly in the fading light. Just in case. The sun was dipping below the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows. The temperature was dropping fast. They couldn't leave the woman. They couldn't wait. They were trapped between a critical injury and an unseen threat. Just as panic threatened to overwhelm them, a low rumble echoed in the distance. A battered old pickup truck, its paint faded and peeling, lumbered slowly down the road in the opposite direction. It was an ancient Ford, belching a plume of exhaust, and behind the wheel sat an elderly man, his face a roadmap of wrinkles, his eyes narrowed and wary. He eyed them suspiciously, his gaze lingering on the injured woman, then on Mark's hand gripping the tire iron. He slowed, then stopped, observing them for a long silent moment, the truck's engine idling roughly. "Jasper," Mark murmured, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "He lives out here somewhere." Sarah had heard of Jasper, the local recluse, known for being gruff and unapproachable, but also surprisingly knowledgeable about the surrounding wilderness. Mark, desperate, waved him down. Jasper's eyes, like chips of flint, took in the scene. The dark, abandoned car, the injured woman, their frantic faces, the tire iron. His expression was unreadable, a mask of weathered indifference. "Sir, please," Mark called out, his voice strained. "We found her like this. She's hurt bad. We need help. No cell service." Sarah, seeing a flicker of something in his eyes, perhaps a hint of concern buried deep beneath his hardened exterior, quickly added, "She needs a doctor. We don't know what happened." Jasper didn't offer help immediately. Instead, his gaze shifted pointedly to the dense woods where Sarah had seen the glint. He looked at them, then back at the trees, a knowing, unsettling look on his face. "You two ain't from round here, are ya?" he rasped, his voice like gravel scraping against stone. "Some things are best left alone." His words sent a fresh wave of dread through Sarah. He wasn't just being gruff. He was hinting at something far more sinister. He revealed that the area had a dark history, whispering about disappearances from decades ago, strange occurrences, all related to a specific secluded section of the forest where the dark car was parked. He didn't elaborate, But his words, spoken with a chilling certainty, sowed a new seed of terror. He warned them about the shadows that watch, making them question if they'd stumbled into something far more dangerous than a simple accident. His eyes, though old, held a depth of knowledge that unnerved her. Despite his ominous warning, a grudging offer of help, or at least a path, finally emerged. "There's an old ranger cabin," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "About 2 miles deeper into that forest if you follow the old logging trail. It ain't much, but it's hidden. Might be safer than the road for now." He gestured vaguely towards a barely visible track leading into the trees, then without another word, he put his truck in gear and rumbled away, leaving them alone again with more questions than answers, but also a potential, albeit risky, alternative. Faced with the injured woman, no cell service, and Jasper's cryptic warning about being watched, Mark made the only choice they had. They had to get off the main road. The ranger cabin, however remote and dilapidated, seemed like their only option. It was a gamble, a desperate leap into the unknown, but staying put felt like waiting for trouble to find them. Mark carefully, gently, moved the injured woman from the ground into the back seat of their SUV. She groaned faintly, a sound that tore at Sarah's heart. They then began the arduous task of driving down the overgrown, barely visible logging trail Jasper had indicated. It was a brutal ride. The SUV, not designed for such terrain, groaned and protested. Branches scraped against the paint, sounding like skeletal fingers dragging across a blackboard. The silence inside the car was punctuated only by the groan of the engine, the jarring bumps, and the injured woman's shallow, ragged breaths. Every few minutes, Mark would glance in the rearview mirror, his eyes scanning the dark, imposing wall of trees behind them, as if expecting something to emerge. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 20 minutes, the trail opened slightly into a small, overgrown clearing. In the center stood the cabin. It was dilapidated, its windows boarded up, its porch sagging, but it was undeniably shelter. Mark carefully carried the woman inside, laying her gently on the dusty floor. Sarah, her hands trembling, fumbled for their first aid kit. She cleaned the wound on the woman's head as best she could, applying antiseptic wipes and then a thick bandage trying to stem the bleeding. The woman remained unconscious, her breathing still shallow. While Mark continued to tend to the woman, checking her pulse and trying to make her more comfortable, Sarah, needing to do something, anything, began to explore the cabin. It was small, just 2 rooms, filled with the musty scent of damp earth and decay. In what must have been the main living area, she found a rickety wooden desk. On it, beneath a thick layer of dust, lay several old leather-bound logbooks. They looked like something out of a forgotten era. Curiosity overriding her fear, Sarah picked one up, blowing off the dust. The pages were yellowed, brittle, filled with faded ink. They were entries from former rangers, detailing patrols, wildlife sightings, and weather observations. As she flipped through them, a chilling pattern began to emerge. Several entries spanning decades detailed a string of mysterious disappearances from the surrounding area. Hikers, campers, even a few local trappers. All vanished without a trace, their cases eventually going cold. Then her eyes snagged on a specific entry dated years ago. The handwriting was different, more hurried, almost frantic. It mentioned a strange black car, spotted repeatedly near the old logging trail, identical to the one they had found the injured woman beside. The entry spoke of the ranger's growing unease, his feeling of being watched, his suspicions that something was amiss in this secluded part of the wilderness. He had tried to investigate, but his reports had been dismissed as paranoia. The last entry in that particular logbook was simply, "Going to check the northern perimeter. Feeling watched." There was no follow-up entry from that ranger. A cold dread began to seep into Sarah's bones. This wasn't just a random accident. This was connected. The dark car, the disappearances, the ranger's chilling last words. She continued to flip through the logbooks, her fingers brushing against the brittle pages. Tucked into one of the later logbooks, almost hidden between 2 pages, she found a small, faded photograph. It was an old Polaroid, the colors muted by time. In it, a young woman, no older than the injured victim lying on the floor, stood smiling beside a familiar, older man. The man had a kind, crinkled smile and a distinctive birthmark on his cheek. Sarah's breath hitched. It was Mark's Uncle Ben. Uncle Ben. Mark's family had talked about him in hushed tones for years. He had mysteriously vanished from a family reunion, right here at Aunt Carol's farmhouse, almost 15 years ago. He'd gone for a walk in the woods and never returned. The police had searched but found nothing. His disappearance had been a lingering shadow over their family gatherings, a painful unresolved mystery. The young woman in the photo bore an uncanny resemblance to the injured victim. The same deep-set eyes, the same strong jawline. Sarah looked from the photo to the unconscious woman, then back to the photo. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. This wasn't just a random act of violence. It was a link to a long-forgotten family tragedy. And they, Sarah and Mark, had just stumbled headfirst into it. The injured woman, she deduced, was Emily, Uncle Ben's daughter, who they vaguely remembered as a quiet child at those early reunions. "Mark," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling, holding out the faded photograph. "Look." Mark took the photo, his eyes widening as he recognized his uncle. His face paled, the last vestiges of his earlier calm dissolving into a look of profound shock and dawning horror. He looked at the photo, then at Emily, then back at the photo. The connection was undeniable. This was Emily. And if Emily was here, injured in this remote place, found next to a car identical to one mentioned in a ranger's logbook about disappearances, then Uncle Ben's vanishing act was far more sinister than anyone had ever imagined. They were no longer just good Samaritans. They were now entangled in a dark, dangerous secret. Just as they processed this horrifying revelation, a sound from outside shattered the cabin's fragile peace. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, crunching on the fallen leaves and twigs. And then a dragging sound like something being pulled across the rough ground. Mark's head snapped towards the boarded-up window. He moved silently, cautiously, peering through a narrow crack in the rotting wood. Sarah held her breath, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. He saw a shadowy figure, large and imposing, moving slowly through the dense undergrowth just outside the cabin. It was too dark to make out details, but the sheer bulk of the man was evident. He seemed to be searching, his movements slow, methodical, like a predator tracking prey. The figure stopped, turning its head slightly towards the cabin, as if sensing their presence, as if the very air vibrated with their fear. It was a chilling moment, confirming their worst fears. They were being hunted. The hulking man outside began to circle the cabin, his footsteps heavy and deliberate, a relentless rhythm against the rustling leaves. Mark, gripping the tire iron like a lifeline, positioned himself by the door, his body a shield between Sarah, the unconscious Emily, and the looming threat. The air inside the cabin grew impossibly thick, suffocating with unspoken terror. Every creak of the old wood, every rustle outside, sent a fresh jolt of adrenaline through Sarah's veins. Then a second figure emerged from the deeper shadows, smaller and more agile than the first, but disturbingly familiar. Sarah's breath hitched. It was David. Mark's older cousin, David. His face, usually thin and sharp, was contorted with a mixture of anger and desperation, his eyes gleaming with a manic intensity. He carried a hunting rifle, its barrel glinting ominously in the faint moonlight filtering through the trees. "Mark!" "Sarah!" David's voice, usually a sneering drawl, was now ragged, strained, filled with a bitter fury. He shouted through the thin, rotting walls of the cabin, his words laced with venom. "You think you can just waltz in here, don't you? Think you're so high and mighty? Always the golden boy, Mark. Your family always thought they were better than us, didn't they? Always looking down on me." He rambled, his voice rising in a fevered crescendo, accusing Mark's family of some perceived injustice from years ago, a slight that had festered into a deep-seated resentment. He spoke of an inheritance, a piece of land, a betrayal that had driven him to the brink. Uncle Ben, he found out. He was going to expose me. He had secrets, secrets that would ruin everything. He had to be stopped. His words hung in the air, a chilling confession. He admitted that he and the hulking man, his hired associate, had been tracking Emily, convinced she held clues to Ben's hidden assets, or perhaps proof that would vindicate David's twisted narrative. The dark car was Emily's. They had ambushed her, but she had managed to escape briefly before collapsing from her injury. Sarah, seeing a desperate chance, pushed past Mark, her voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor in her hands. "David! Stop this! Think about what you're doing." She clutched the faded photograph of Uncle Ben and Emily, holding it up to a small broken pane in the window. "Look at this. This is your family. Uncle Ben, he would be ashamed of you. He loved Emily." She appealed to any lingering shred of humanity, any memory of their shared childhood, trying to break through the wall of his rage. David hesitated. A flicker of something, doubt perhaps, or a ghost of a memory crossed his face. But it was quickly replaced by a renewed surge of fury. The hulking man, impatient with David's momentary weakness, let out a guttural roar and smashed a boarded-up window with a powerful fist, splintering wood and glass. "Get in there!" David screamed, his voice raw. Mark, his face a mask of grim determination, met the hulking man's charge with the tire iron. The cabin erupted into a violent struggle. The crash of splintering wood, the grunt of effort, the heavy thud of bodies colliding. Mark fought with a ferocity Sarah had never witnessed, fueled by a primal need to protect. In the chaos, a miracle. Emily stirred. Her eyelids fluttered open, her eyes unfocused, confused. She groaned a soft pain sound. Then her gaze fell upon David, standing in the doorway, rifle in hand, his face contorted. A flash of recognition, and then pure unadulterated terror bloomed in her eyes. A weak but piercing scream tore from her throat, cutting through the din of the fight. "No! You killed him!" The accusation, raw and undeniable, coming from the very victim, shattered David's already fragile composure. He froze, his eyes wide with shock, his face draining of color. The sudden, unexpected confirmation of his guilt hung in the air, a damning truth. In that split second of David's distraction, the hulking man, still struggling with Mark, lunged. Sarah, fueled by a surge of desperate adrenaline, saw a heavy rusty wrench lying near the fireplace. Without a thought, she snatched it up. With a desperate cry, a sound that was half sob, half battle cry, she swung it with all her might, striking the hulking man's exposed knee. He collapsed with a howl of pain, clutching his leg, his attack on Mark broken. At the very same moment, David, startled and disoriented by Emily's scream and the hulking man's cry, stumbled backward. His hunting rifle, held loosely in his shock, slipped from his grasp. It hit the floor with a clatter and discharged, the deafening blast echoing in the confined space. The bullet struck a support beam in the already rotting cabin, causing part of the weak ceiling to give way. Dust, splinters of wood, and crumbling plaster rained down on them. David, disoriented and panicking, attempted to flee through the now open window, but he tripped over the struggling hulking man, landing awkwardly on his arm with a sickening crack. The tables had turned. They were injured, exposed, and trapped. Hours later, the cabin clearing was a chaotic scene of flashing blue and red lights. The wail of sirens, once a distant, hopeful sound, was now deafeningly close. Police cruisers, an ambulance, and even a fire truck, their headlights cutting through the pre-dawn darkness, filled the small space. Sarah and Mark, huddled together, watched as paramedics carefully loaded Emily onto a stretcher. Her eyes, though still hazy, met Sarah's for a brief moment, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Their distress signal, a desperate gamble, had worked. After the struggle, with David and his accomplice incapacitated, Mark, with surprising ingenuity, had jury-rigged a crude antenna from an old, rusted radio he found in the cabin, aiming it towards what he hoped was the nearest town. He'd managed to send a single garbled message, a faint plea for help, after getting a brief, weak signal. It was enough. And Jasper, the old recluse, had played his part too. After leaving them, his wary eyes had continued to observe the dark car on the road. When he saw no movement for hours, and then heard the faint, distant sounds of struggle and a gunshot, he had called in a tip to the local sheriff, confirming his earlier observations about suspicious activity in the area. His gruff warning had been a strange form of assistance. Emily was stabilized and airlifted to a hospital in the nearest city. Her head injury was severe, but the doctors were optimistic about her recovery. David and the hulking man, his accomplice, were apprehended, their injuries tended to, and then taken into custody. David, his arm in a sling and his face a mask of defeat, finally broke. The weight of his actions, combined with the shock of Emily's sudden accusation, proved too much. He confessed. Not just to the assault on Emily but to a far darker crime. He admitted that he was responsible for Uncle Ben's death all those years ago. It had been an argument, he claimed, a heated confrontation in these very woods. Ben had discovered David trying to illegally claim old family property, land deeds that rightfully belonged to others. David, desperate and cornered, had ambushed Ben, silencing him permanently, then meticulously staged his disappearance to look like he'd simply wandered off. He had buried Ben's body deep in the forest, convinced his secret was safe. Emily, it turned out, had recently stumbled upon new evidence: old letters, a hidden map that led her back to this remote area, seeking answers about her father. David had been tracking her, determined to stop her from uncovering the truth, just as he had stopped Ben. Emily recovered, slowly but surely, both physically and emotionally. The trauma of her ordeal would undoubtedly linger, but she was alive, and the truth about her father's disappearance had finally come to light, bringing a painful but necessary closure. David and his accomplice faced severe charges, their fate sealed by their own confessions and the overwhelming evidence. The family reunion, originally planned as a joyous occasion, transformed into something else entirely. It became a somber gathering, a painful reckoning with the dark truths that had come to light. There were tears, anger, and shock, but also a strange sense of unity as the family grappled with the revelations. The secrets buried for years were finally uncovered, allowing a long-held grief to finally begin to heal. Sarah and Mark returned home, changed by their ordeal. Their bond, forged in fear and desperate courage, was stronger than ever. They carried a newfound appreciation for the fragility of life, and the hidden darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of seemingly normal lives. Even within the confines of family, the experience left them with a lingering sense of unease, a stark reminder that some secrets are too dangerous to remain buried, and that sometimes turning around is the only way to truly see what's behind you. What would you have done if you stumbled upon such a dark secret so far from civilization?